Mental Health, a podcast from the Wellness Project where I interview mental health professionals on all things mental health and wellness. Today I'm here with Kathleen. Kathleen, do you mind introducing yourself before we get started?
Thanks, Allison. Hi, my name is Kathleen Joseph. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the Gainesville, Florida area. I work with individuals, I work with couples, and I specialize in working with women of color who have experienced a lifetime of adversity and stress at the intersection of race and sex. But in general, I work with people on healing trauma, and I have lots of experience working with college-age students. So I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this episode. We've done a lot of different topics, mental health and wellness, but one of the things we haven't done is like kind of zeroed in on one part of college. You know, we've done this all encompassing any college student, any college age young adult, but we haven't really talked about first time college students. What that's like, you know, what's going on mentally, emotionally, what it's like to be going away or going to class for the first time. And so I'm really excited kind of for this episode. So if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and start diving into some questions.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So just starting big, what are some of the emotional and mental impacts of going away to college for the first time?
Yeah. So sort of to answer that question, I'd like to sort of invite the idea that we are social beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we understand that we're social beings, we can kind of see that this idea of this kid going to college, perhaps away from their family, and maybe not, maybe they're staying home, but still they're journeying on this process. There's this sort of rupture happening in the social organism, right? I think that's a more helpful way of thinking about it, because I think sometimes we approach these conversations really high level. Oh, mental health, what's happening with a person. But if we really remember, I wanted to start with this, that we're experiencing, or what this is this shift in the social agreement or social relationships that a person is experiencing. And that is what creates what we experience or what we understand as impacts to someone's mental health. I think it makes a little bit more sense when we think about it like that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that too, especially because I mean, I've done it. You know, I've gone away to college for the first time, but I don't think I've really put two and two together of like, I like that phrase you use, like the changes in like social agreements.
Yeah.
Because you move away and everything's so different.
Right.
The people you're around, the way you act around them, the things you do with them. And so I think that's kind of a neat thing to talk about and to think about when going into this conversation.
Yeah, like, your high school friends, you notice after that first semester and you go back home, if you went away for college, those connections feel different. You know what I mean? It's not what it was. And all of those changes, I don't think we talk about this enough, which this is what feels exciting about talking about this. Those changes impact us. Oh gosh, how come we're not hanging out? How come we're not connecting? What's happening here? Even if we're not conscious of that, somewhere inside of us, we're processing and integrating.
Yeah. Wow. Are there different aspects, and I'm sure there are, but I'm just curious of whether we can name some of these, because going to college looks different for everyone. You know, sometimes you move 6 states away, sometimes you move 30 minutes away, sometimes you don't leave home. And so I'm curious, like, are there different challenges for different people in those different situations?
Yeah. So maybe if we kind of made the two blunt categories of those who move away and those who stay home for simplicity's sake, and maybe we can talk about the folks in the middle. So if we look at the folks that move away, kind of going back to that conversation of the social agreements, those things being impacted, those are the individuals that are probably at the farther end of having to renegotiate everything, right? And so here you have individuals who have to, okay, maybe I didn't, if I did some shopping for my groceries, maybe I wasn't completely responsible, and I sort of have to negotiate how that happens now. Maybe I was the person that took care of some of the cleaning in my home, but I could sort of rely on other people. But now that's maybe not what the agreements are, or I have to come up with different agreements with roommates, right? And so these individuals, they're probably experiencing the most change. And for
Mm-hmm.
that reason, they're going to be vulnerable to sort of some different impacts, right? And so, like, I remember treating an individual who was a college age student who had a really, really strong family of origin. His family really worked hard to collaborate and help him in many ways. And so our work became, how do we empower you to become the person that takes care of buying groceries, preparing meals, and deciding how do I do that, right? And I'm going to meal prep. And so these individuals are more vulnerable to some really unique impacts to their mood because of the nature of that distance from their community. When you look at individuals who stay home, they might not have to renegotiate some of those relationships or how I get things done, but certainly they're having to renegotiate inner identity. How do I show up in this different space that is requiring me to excel in a way that maybe is new from high school, right?
Mm-hmm.
In my previous life, I used to teach a course at the University of Florida called Human Growth and Development. And one of the staple studies that we used to reference followed students as they moved through sort of the different types of schooling. So, through through 12, you have elementary, middle, high school. And it noticed that these students at the start of each, so at the end of elementary and the beginning of middle, at the end of middle and the beginning of high school, they experience drops in their academic performance. So the big question became, what's happening to our students' intelligence? Are our students' intelligence dropping as they move into these new spaces? When researchers unpacked this, they realized that the students weren't getting dumber. What was happening is they were really bearing the weight of change. And that
Yeah.
had such an impact on them that their grades rebounded as they learned new coping skills, adjustments. But really, we really want to kind of appreciate the way transition can impact our overall mental health. So I share that to give us a more concrete example of this.
Yeah. I want to restate that phrase you just used, bearing the weight of change.
Mm.
Because I think that's the aspect of going away to college that we, like you said, we don't always account for that, you know?
Mm.
I can name all the things I felt so prepared for when I left. I can also name to you that I called my mom every day. How do I do this? How do I do that?
That's
When am I
right.
supposed to do this? I don't have time
Yeah.
to do this. Who
Yeah.
did this before? and so I think that that bear the weight of change, I think it's important just to restate that and to name that.
Yeah.
Because even those who feel so prepared, there's so much. Ooh.
Oh man, thunderstorm.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all can hear it now. I told Kathleen before we started that it's storming here and it's gotten worse. So I apologize if you
Oh,
hear some rain.
stay
um,
safe, Allison.
yeah, but yeah, so it just, yeah, wow, that was just such a good answer. And there's so much of it that I just want to sit in for a while, but that phrase really hit me.
I'm grateful it resonates, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm sort of having this experience as well of remembering my undergraduate years. And I thought I was a pretty bright kid. I thought I was pretty responsible and resourceful. And there were those calls. How do I? And so
Yeah.
normalizing that, for all of our incoming freshmen, this is normal. Like, you're not the five-headed dragon. You're transitioning, you're learning, you're
Yeah.
bearing the weight of change.
Yeah. And I think that's something too that we don't often talk about. And I'm going off script a little bit. I'm sorry, but I think too that we often have these feelings of well, I'm sure everybody else can do this just fine. I'm sure that
The social
I
comparison.
missed something somewhere. Yeah, comparing ourselves, and I think that also kind of ties into it. I would think a little bit of well, I saw my friend do this the other day just fine. Why do I have to ask for help?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And so I always like to think about that too.
Can I say something about that I think
Yeah.
would be helpful?
Yeah, go for it.
So it's our tendency as humans to do that. In my work with people, I often teach people that our brains are like negative scanning machines. We're always constantly scanning for threats. It's how our species survived to this point. And so a social comparison moment is a threat. Our brains are like, oh my God, I have to do, it feels that way too, right? And so it becomes really important. I'm so glad you said that, to kind of identify that as normal. But also, my work with people, we start to unpack, is that helping you? Like, ultimately, is that, tell me what's happening. Is that really helping you, making that social comparison? And a lot of people will tell me no. And my final point, most people will tell me, well, gosh, something about social media, which we're learning that social media really triggers this social comparison machine that ultimately has the power to tank our mood.
Yeah, definitely. And that's such a hard one too, because we talk a lot about like meeting college age young adults where they are, and where they are is social media, but is that really where we want to meet them? You know, like we want to be that positive aspect of it, but to find that positive aspect, they are going to end up on those comparisons throughout it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like it's part and parcel. You're absolutely right.
yeah, yeah. Wow. Um, are there any common trends with mental health in first year college students?
Hmm. So the biggest ones I see are around homesickness, the adjustment piece. Um, you know, again, I can't stress how much that adjustment impacts us. And so sometimes people are surprised. They might think, gosh, I'm going to be the person that navigates this shift well. And then they're surprisingly homesick. And so just kind of remaining open to that fact that homesickness happens. And when we care a lot about people, we get sad when we don't have them. And that's normal. That's pro-social. That means that you're a healthy, good human. Um, Sometimes we see breakups. Usually I see that a little bit later, after the first semester or so, when long distance is not sustainable, and sort of being able to understand just kind of the reality, the stress of what it means to navigate relationship as you're growing as an adult, but also long distance. So kind of those are a couple of the things I always see.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things I like to talk about support systems, because I think whether we're talking about first year, senior year, master's student, when we go to college, we meet new people, and sometimes our support systems change, or they don't change, but new people are added. The way you access your support systems are different, because you might be 6 hours away from what was your biggest support system, and it still is, but it's hard to get to them, you know? And so I'm curious to like, what happens to those support systems? What do we typically find college first year college students kind of leaning towards? I don't know if that question makes sense. I can restate it if it doesn't.
Yeah, so sort of like how our support systems change.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they do change, and I like this question because it's a recognition that our support systems change, and it doesn't mean we're bad people if that happens. Seriously, our support systems are going through a growth cycle like we're going through a growth cycle. And so normalizing that I can expect some of that to change, and I'm going to feel some grief around that and sadness. And gosh, maybe if I'm feeling so grieved that I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, I'm not able to focus on school, perhaps it's time for me to talk to somebody and get some help. But yeah, that normalization, that support systems invariably change. Sometimes we have our support systems that get richer, and we can lean into that high school friend that was more of sort of a passing colleague, if you will, in high school. Um, but sometimes, support systems disintegrate. Support systems are incredibly important. And so if you find yourself sort of on exile, you're like, here, I'm here at school, and I'm just completely by myself. All my support systems are withered. I'm worried about you. I want you to know that. And I think it would be really important to start to work on getting plugged back into people who care about you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just something that always comes to my mind. Support systems, peer support. What do we do? You know? And so I'd love to like hone in on that peer support a little more. And what it's like building those connections of your peers when it comes to mental health and wellness in your first year.
Yeah. So build those communities. A lot of universities have a robust awareness. They just have so much experience understanding everything that we just talked about, that students transition, that we're making new social connections, that those social and support connections are important. And so leaning into I would wonder, like, what are things that are going on now that we're in sort of the more post-COVID era? What are things that are going on campus, and how can I get connected? At the University of Florida, one thing that I will often tell students that find me and we begin doing work together and we get to that place where we're talking about how do you engage more support in your life, I encourage students to join a support group. We have a whole list at our Counseling and Wellness Center of support groups that can be easily found online, because it's like joining a group of people that want to be there for the same reasons you want to be there. And so you're getting all of these sort of filtered results, right? You're not at the bar trying to make friends with somebody who you don't know what their intentions are. You're with people in a safe place that's facilitated, and you can start to dive in and do some really good therapy work and build your social connections, right?
Yeah, I would like to talk about that a little more, because I actually don't think that's something we've talked about at all in this podcast, is support groups. I think we've talked about it like in the context of, different types of mental illnesses, but I don't think we've talked about like being in college and accessing a support group and how we do that.
Oh my gosh. I just want to say support. When we look at supporting somebody's mental health, getting them with supportive significant others, that's one way that some of us therapists talk about. Probably one of the hugest ways that you could take care of somebody's mental health. I've treated people who were isolated, we worked on their support system, and then they got friends and stopped seeing me. You know what I mean? Like, that crucial. We don't do well feeling isolated. I believe we learned that in a very deep way during the COVID pandemic. And so encouraging people when they're not feeling their best, if they're doing that work of, if there's a trauma, we're addressing that and that type of thing, but also pairing that with support, crucial, I would say.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned like counseling centers typically have like resources for support groups. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah. So here at Florida, definitely this is the time where I start to tell my clients, hey, Google Counseling and Wellness Center, UF groups, get on those wait lists and kind of start building that community.
Yeah. And I have, we talked about counseling centers, what it looks like to go walk into one, to call one, how to find them. But I just don't think we've touched on that support group aspect. And so I'm really excited you brought that up into attention, that this is another aspect of what could happen if you, need to contact your counseling center, or what you can get from your counseling center. So I really appreciate adding that.
You're welcome. Again, I want this to feel attainable. Wellness looks many, many different ways. I'm a huge advocate of therapy. And we don't want to be so focused in this and thinking, gosh, if you're not seeing a therapist, you're not taking care of yourself. There are so many ways a therapist can help you unpack that. A therapist can help you to think about that if you're feeling overwhelmed, and just like, sometimes we just don't know what we don't know, right? And so as you're growing, you need more ideas and that type of thing. Wellness is a huge umbrella of things that we do to take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you for taking this time to talk to me and kind of answering some of these questions. I am fascinated with some of these answers. I'm going to have to go through and watch it again just so I can kind of find more points to sit on.
Thank you.
But I think it was a great conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Allison, for having me. I hope this helps. And go Gators.
And thank you guys for watching.